1 in 4 adults in the United States will experience some kind of mental health condition. To put that into perspective, that means that 5 out of the 20 people in the typical COM 2500 class here at Clemson will experience some kind of mental illness within the next 12 months. That means that either you or someone you know is likely to experience some kind of mental illness. Mental illness impacts us all, no matter where we come from, what we look like, or what we do for work. It's a topic we should all be passionate about. As a psychology major, I've spent a lot of time thinking about, researching, and discussing the various kinds of mental illnesses and the ways that we can treat them. And I've noticed that there's this negative stigma that surrounds the topic. Today, I'm challenging you to stop that stigma. Stop the stigma that makes it so hard to talk about mental health. Stop the stigma that makes it so uncomfortable to admit you've ever struggled with one. Stop the stigma that keeps people who are sick from wanting to seek the help that could help them. Mental illness is a big problem in our society, and people often find it hard to talk about because they're afraid of what it'll do to their reputation. Part of this fear comes from the fact that not everybody's really sure what a mental illness truly is. The National Alliance on Mental Illness defines it as a condition that impacts a person's feeling, thinking, or mood, and may impact their ability to relate to others and function daily. So a common misconception that comes with mental illness is that you get it from just one thing happening. So maybe your boyfriend broke up with you last week and you're really sad and you've been crying for a couple days, and you might think that you're depressed. Most of the time, this isn't the case. Depression and other mental illnesses come from a combination of genetics, your environment, your lifestyle, and the basic structure of your brain. All these things work together to determine whether or not you will have a mental illness. In an article titled "Stop the Stigma, Call Mental Illness a Brain Disease," Patrick Corrigan and Amy Watson looked at the way we as a society view individuals with mental illnesses. They noticed that we tend to see them as weak, or dangerous, or irresponsible, or lacking in character, as if this chemical imbalance in their brain makes them any less of a person worthy of our respect. Professor Graham Thornycroft for Healthline News put it best when he said, "We now have clear evidence that stigma has a toxic effect by preventing people from seeking help for mental health problems. The profound reluctance to be a mental health patient means that people will put off seeing a doctor for months, years, or even at all, which in turn delays their recovery." So this negative stigma that surrounds the topic of mental illness makes us as a society judge people who have mental illnesses and define them by whatever it is they're struggling from. In an article for TED.com, journalist Andrew Solomon said, "People still think that it's shameful if they have a mental illness. They think it shows personal weakness. They think it shows a failing. If it's their children who have mental illnesses, they think it reflects their failure as parents. Now, why do we define people with mental illnesses by this disease?" Up on the screen, there are 5 brain scans. The first, all the way on this side, is of a neurotypical brain, or someone who does not have a mental illness. The following 4 are from 4 different people with 4 different mental illnesses. As you can see, each brain looks different. That's because mental illnesses are diseases that impact the brain. Now, you wouldn't define someone with a cold by the fact that their sinuses are congested. Yet, for some reason, someone who has an imbalance of dopamine would be defined by their schizophrenia. Mental illnesses are a disease. They're not something we can snap out of. They're not something we can necessarily control. And they're not something you can just think happy thoughts until they go away. Mental illnesses are diseases that infect the brain, and it's time that we started treating them as such. Now, in order to get rid of this stigma, we need to be more educated on the topic and more accepting towards those who are struggling. Now, if you're in the audience tonight and you're currently struggling with a mental illness, the Mayo Clinic has some tips. The first is to get treatment. I know that the stigma can be completely overwhelming. It's everywhere. It's in the media, it's in the words that we say to our friends, it's all over the place. But you have to get treatment. There are people out there who love you, who support you, and want you to get help. You cannot let the stigma create self-doubt and shame. You can't isolate yourself, and you can't equate yourself with your mental illness. If you take anything away from my speech tonight, I hope it's that you remember you're so much more than whatever it is you're struggling with. You are not your mental illness. So get help. Talk to your friends, talk to your parents, your neighbors, your teachers even, anyone who you are comfortable speaking with. And lastly, speak out. Speak out against the stigma whenever you see it happening. And if you're comfortable with it, speak out from personal experience. There's nothing more impactful for those who are struggling than to hear the story of someone who survived a mental illness or is currently battling it too, and to know that you're really not alone. Now, if you don't have a mental illness, there's still things that you can do to stop this stigma. Patrick Corrigan and Amy Watson published another article where they gave you some tips as well. The first is to get educated. Part of my purpose here tonight is to educate you on what a mental illness is and what it's not, and to shed light on the fact that there is a stigma that surrounds it. The second step is to make contact. Studies have proven time and time again that the very best way to rid ourselves of stigmas and stereotypes is to meet people you think would fit those stereotypes and to realize that stereotypes are just labels. Everyone who's suffering from a mental illness is still a person. They're not what they're struggling from. So get educated, learn more about mental illnesses, and make contact. Chances are you already know someone who's struggling. As I told you before, 25% of our population is. So get educated, make contact, and be there for those who are struggling. So the stigma surrounds mental illness, and it's a bad thing. It perpetuates a harmful stereotype, and it keeps people who are sick from seeking help. Tonight I've given you a challenge. I've challenged you to stop that stigma. It seems like a big, impossible feat, but it's really not. It's something each of us can do individually. You alone are in charge of the way you think about and perceive other people. You are in charge of the words that come out of your mouth. You can change this stigma just by changing the way you think. So I'm challenging you to be more accepting, be more open, be more understanding towards those who are struggling. If we as a society change the way we think about mental illness, the world will be a much better place. Imagine a world where if you were struggling from a mental health problem, you could go seek treatment without fear of judgment or ruining your reputation. So the best thing we can do is to be there for those who are struggling. As Shannon L. Adler once said, never give up on someone with a mental illness. When I becomes we, illness becomes wellness. Thank you.